Doug. Thanks, everyone. We talked a little bit with some of you in the past about ghost guns, and we continue to talk about it. I think we're at a real significant point with the possible passage of this bill, which would address really significant issues that we, and when I say we, I mean certainly here in Manhattan, but law enforcement across the city and the country. We'll hear from Justin later. Everytown, which is a significant leader in this space, reports out that 1,000% increase from a survey of a number of cities across the country in terms of the proliferation of ghost guns. We're seeing that here in New York in NYPD seizures. I believe we have a slide on that, and also what we're seeing in our practice enforcement, and also our gun buybacks. And so when people talk about emerging issues, like it's here, we're seeing it, day by day, week by week, and we're talking about. Dave will go into this more. Really, we have strong gun laws in New York State for a reason on traditional guns. Now you can get a printer like that one, costs about $200. You can print out. It's printing out. What it's printing out now will take about an hour and a half. So you'll see that print out a frame in about 5 to 6 hours. And so we talk so much about the iron pipeline, guns coming up from North Carolina, South Carolina, from Pennsylvania, but we've moved from the iron pipeline to like really the kitchen table pipeline. You can sit in the comfort of your own home at your kitchen table with polymer and print out a gun. I think the terminology ghost gun is misleading. Sometimes people think of like Casper and it's a toy. It is just as lethal. When we first started, the sort of 1.0 non-3D print from sort of assemble yourself. There were some operability issues. You are not going to know the difference if you're struck. And in terms of wear and tear and operation and durability, these are operating far differently from just 5-10 years ago. So we've been really, really active as an office in this space. You start one with our enforcement work. Dave Stuart will tell you about some of the cases under which you've covered, but I think to pull them together as a compendium and think about them as a set is very helpful. And then we've also been very active using the bully pulpit. So whether it was calling on YouTube when we did proffers and meetings with defendants who we had charged, and saying, how do you know to do this, right? It's not intuitive. It's not, these were younger defendants. I was watching Call of Duty on YouTube, and I click, and next thing I know, it's teaching me how to build a gun. I still to build a gun. So we called on YouTube to change its algorithm. It's doing that. We're being vigilant on that. More recently, and really sort of tethered and tied and leading to the legislation we're going to talk about today, we've been working on a voluntary basis with the industry. So we have an agreement with 2 3D printing companies to block, on their own, adopt technology to block the creation of guns from their technology. And then we have a similar type of agreement with one digital design company, which will take blueprints off their websites. Right? So this works like a CAD file, what I would call a disk. You stick it in, you need that to sort of print off. So we can stop the technology from printing that. You go a long way. And what we've seen is that unlike with traditional gun manufacturers where they make guns and there's a lot of resistance to change and restrictions and regulation, what we've seen so far in our voluntary discussions is this is not an industry that was focused on making guns. Right? They make technology that you may see in your kids' schools, right? Printing out geometric objects, and that's their focus. It's not making guns. So we've got a lot of, I wouldn't say even cooperation, I would say partnership. But that's all voluntary and it's all one office. The legislation that we have been pushing for a couple of years, and we're so happy that the governor has adopted and is now pushing her version of it, would be the law. Right? It's not just voluntary and not just in Manhattan. The law for obviously a very big state, a very big market, and it would do a few things. It would make it a crime to manufacture guns. Right now we are kind of doing a workaround if you print out a bunch of those kind of light blue receivers, we print out 100 of them, we'll charge you with possession 100 times. We want to make it so that that's really manufacturing. If you're printing 100 of those, you're not a hobbyist. You're gun manufacturer. Really directly on the agreements we've been doing, the voluntary ones, it would make it unlawful for sort of to possess the CAD files sort of with the intent to distribute them, and it would also call on and sort of convene experts to work on the technology to block the printers and the other mechanisms from creating. So the kind of things we agreed upon voluntarily, it would make it the law. And I'll just end on this note, it's really, really intuitive to me. I mean, we can think about the technology, Dave will go into that. Justin will talk about great work Everytown is doing. For me, as someone who's just sort of, take a step back, you can't, go for any of these great devices you have in front of you, you can't print counterfeit money. We don't let you do that. So why would we let you print lethal guns? It's just that basic and that simple, and hopefully the legislation will agree that this is the appropriate prescription for this really, really significant issue. So with that, I turn it over to...
This morning, we're going to provide a presentation which overviews the evolution and increasing prevalence of ghost guns and 3D printed firearms and parts here in New York, how 3D printers are used in that manufacturing process, why there's a need for the law to catch up and process and address this new and evolving technology, and then how the proposed legislation can begin to address this rising threat. As Dave Bragg said, technology has gotten to a point where 3D printed guns and ghost guns are just as reliable and operable as any other commercial firearm, and just as dangerous and capable of killing. And not surprisingly, we've seen these weapons recovered in numerous search warrants across the city, along with evidence that they were being manufactured using 3D printers. In fact, we've moved beyond the risk that these weapons can be used, and now we see them used in shootings and homicides across the city. The data backs up this trend. Ghost guns and 3D printed guns are on the rise. What was once a rarely occurring anomaly for law enforcement in 2009 and 2010 has become a serious threat, with recoveries having risen from a few dozen just several years ago to now several hundred every single year.
If I could just, the last one, and this is unscripted, but as I look at the sort of the decrease from 2022 to 2024, I can't help to say I think that I would view that against the backdrop that shootings are down 70% in Manhattan. So the universe of recoveries in Manhattan gone down very significantly.
Yeah, of course. Part of what makes these investigations challenging is that the technologies fueling ghost guns and 3D printed guns are constantly evolving. When we started doing the Ghost Gun Initiative several years ago, the primary concern was commercially made frames and receivers sold in so-called 80% kits that could be built with just a few tools at home. Once federal rules required that these receivers be serialized in the 80% build kits, the industry moved to what we consider hybrid ghost guns, or privately made frames and receivers using a 3D printer at home, in your kitchen, like D.A. Bragg said, and built with legally accessible firearm parts bought from online retailers like eBay or other specialized firearm distributors. The next evolution that we're seeing is a lot more now, is that firearms being designed and built using more 3D printed parts and nuts and bolts available at any hardware store, so as to further avoid attempts at state and federal regulation. None of these 3D printed firearms can be built without CAD files, right? These are computer-aided design software files or digital designs that tell the printer what and how to make it. These CAD files are readily available for free or for purchase in online catalogs and libraries. Also, most of the 3D printing companies that sell printers here in the US have what's known as cloud hosting sites, where you can upload designs of CAD files or browse digital libraries, right, of CAD files that others have shared. And once you pick a design and upload it, the printer software will slice or format that design so that it can be read and converted to your printer specifications. And these concerns, as we said, just aren't in a vacuum. We've seen them firsthand in some of the cases that we've prosecuted here in the office. And in particular, the case against Christopher Fox exemplifies a lot of the risks and dangers of the 3D printed firearms. On February 19th of 2025, just about a year ago, Christopher Fox pled guilty to possessing the assault weapon you see here in these photos. This assault weapon in particular was almost entirely 3D printed and is a popular version of the FGC-9 design, which can be built using the CAD file shared over the internet, and which we found during the search warrant of his residence just here in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. The NYPD detectives recovered a 3D printer in that apartment where they found digital blueprint files that were used to print that very same assault weapon. Now, the risk of 3D printers isn't just limited to firearms. We've seen these printers manufacture components, like you see here on the screen, an AR autoseer, which turns a semi-automatic rifle into a machine gun. The 3D printer in the background here is actually printing an oversized version of that AR-15 autoseer right now. And as Dave Bragg said, that will take about an hour, hour and a half to print. And of course, the autoseers aren't limited to AR-15s. You can print what's known as a Glock switch, which would similarly convert a handgun into an automatic weapon. Let's take a look at how an AR-15 rifle will fire without, normally in a semi-automatic way. Yeah, as you can see, every bullet that's fired requires a pull of the trigger, That's a semi-automatic. And this was done by our law enforcement partners at the NYPD and their major case team that investigates ghost guns and 3D printed firearms. Here is an AR-15 rifle with a 3D printed autoseer. You can see a significant difference, right? One pull of the trigger unloaded the entire magazine of bullets. These switches and autoseers are incredibly dangerous and increase the likelihood of mass casualty events. And we've seen that in places across the US, from Chicago to Newark. These firearms, when unlicensed, and firearm switches and autoseers are illegal across New York, and the 3D printer technology now makes them accessible in every kitchen across the country. What we're asking for is laws that make the manufacture, not just the possession of these guns and illegal parts, illegal, along with the distribution of the digital blueprints that enable their manufacture in the first place. And we can't prosecute our way out of firearm trafficking and gun violence. We've reached out to companies in the 3D printing market to encourage them to self-regulate their products and marketplaces to block customers from uploading guns and gun parts to their cloud platforms. They don't want their products used and services used illegally either. And several of these 3D printing manufacturers have already agreed to adopt the technology and prevent some of these uploads to their online services. For example, after our outreach, several 3D printing companies have updated their user agreements and policies to prohibit firearm manufacturing, like FlashForge, a popular 3D printing company. Creality, another cloud company, has also updated their users about these policies and their user agreements, and also notified their users that firearm and firearm part manufacturing is illegal and not in compliance with their policies. And not only have they updated their user agreements, but they've also taken steps to remove these types of CAD files from their online libraries. As you can see, this is a Creality Cloud website, and this Creality is a very popular 3D printing company, and they offer a cloud service where people can search for and find designs that they want to print. When you look up a search term like Glock, you'll notice that you don't actually find any illegal firearm designs here. In fact, if you try to upload a firearm design like we did here of the FMDA, which is a very popular Glock style 3D printed design, it will reject the upload to the cloud. And as you can see, not only is it rejected, but it informs the user of the gun policy user regulations that they've put into place. So, like we said, a very good example of the private sector outreach that the office has done, right? Not just to prosecute our way out of this, but to do really successful private sector outreach. So, it brings us towards the end and the proposal from the governor's office that we'd like to have codified, which would make the proactive intervention that we've been attempting criminal in the manufacturing 3D printed firearms and components, such that all printers sold in New York would be required to have this technology that blocks manufacturing of firearms. And of course, we'll continue to work with some of the digital design companies to remove the files from their platforms and work with other states to encourage legislation. I'm going to pass it over to Everytown and Justin at this time, right?
Yeah, that's great.
All right, thank you.
I was just needling.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Justin Wagner. I'm the managing director at Everytown for Gun Safety. We're the country's largest gun violence prevention organization. And I want to thank the district attorney and his team for having us to talk about 3D guns. I do want to just jump off of that last point. We work with a lot of elected officials, a lot of prosecutors' offices, and their caseload is gigantic. And most prosecutors' offices in this country focus on that caseload. And this office not only does that, but then takes the time to do private outreach to companies to work on policy. And that's really unique and innovative. And we just want to thank your office for being such leaders in this space. You may have heard gun politics and policy in our country sometimes can be complicated. I don't think that's one of these instances. You know, for years, our country has had a consensus that certain people shouldn't have access to guns. So people with felony convictions, children, violent extremists, and that's a consensus that goes across party lines. But in recent years, ghost guns have really kind of shaken the ability and allowed those type of individuals to access weapons without the traditional background check system. And that's really what this is about, right? If you want a gun in this country, you can have one if you're not a prohibited person, if you're not a child. Ghost gun turns that on its head. And in the past, when we talked about ghost guns, we were talking about these kits. So you would buy a kit, plastic would come, you'd mill it at home, and you'd make your own gun, essentially. It would come in the mail. But what was the plastic pipeline really is now a digital problem. Because now with that $250 printer, and with just a file that you can easily get on the internet, you can make your own gun, you can make your own Glock switch. And that's really just shaken up our understanding of guns in this country. This is not a problem of the future. The recoveries are real. We surveyed 20 cities, mayors, and data in this issue is emerging, I'll be quite frank. It's hard to get recoveries because police often don't know if they're looking at a 3D printed gun or a traditional gun. But the data we collected from 20 cities showed a 1,000% increase over the last 5 years in 3D gun recoveries at crimes. And that is only going to escalate. You know, at Everytown, we've been tracking this for several years. We published a white paper on the issue that not only details policy proposals, but also the use of violent extremists with these weapons. There is an entire community of people online that are dedicated to anarchy, to crypto-anarchist beliefs, to white supremacist beliefs. FGC 9, which was referenced earlier, FGC stands for Fuck Gun Control. A lot of the people that are active in this space in creating these files and distributing them have very, very far out there views when it comes to ideology and guns. Everytown also convened a group, which the district attorney joined us at Cornell Tech this past fall. We had members of the industry, we had academics, engineering experts, we had law enforcement, and there was tremendous consensus to work on this problem. And I will say that this really is an issue where we're going to need collaboration, we're going to need the private sector, we're going to need academics to really solve this problem. Because when technology has outgrown our laws, we need leaders that will step up and put in place systems that get ahead of these type of problems. And the parallel for money is perfect. I don't suggest you do this, but if you have a color printer at home and you tried to scan a $100 bill, your printer would not let you print that, which makes sense. When the color printer was invented, it's very exciting technology, but people saw the possibility of counterfeit money. And so private sector, government came together and made sure our color printers, for the most part, can't do that. But right now you can print a gun on one of those printers. And that's just a huge gap in public safety and consumer safety, and one that we're so excited that Governor Hochul and her budget is tackling. Because if we can require 3D printing companies to implement the same type of blueprint detection we have for counterfeit money, we can really get ahead of this problem. And just very proud to be here as a New Yorker to see both our governor and our district attorney here really taking the lead on this issue. Thank you.
I just want to thank Justin, specifically in Everytown. Generally, a lot of what we've done has been informed by their research and their insights. I should have mentioned the letter we sent to you to follow your first flagging that issue. So we really in here, we develop our own enforcement expertise. We have some legislative expertise, but we always look to folks who are in the space doing this every day. So